As I mentioned earlier, Alicization starts out incredibly confusing and it's done like that deliberately. It starts out with Kirito along with two others as kids in the middle of a forest chopping down a tree. Now, it gives a bunch of indications that they're in a game. However, Kirito is a kid, and it's done from the mindset that he actually is a kid. He's not fully grown, or at least an 18, 19-year-old Kirito that we're currently used to. So how is he in the middle of the forest, but also at the same time in this virtual world, and along with two other characters who it gives clear indication that they're childhood friends of his, but how could that be possible if the nerve gear wasn't invented until he was a lot older? So there's a lot of really strange things going on, and they're discussing various things about how just different things that kids would discuss. So Yugo's job, because they have the other characters, it's Kirito, Yugo, and Alice. So Kirito is just sitting down on a log or something like that, and they're in front of a massive tree, and they're around 13 or so at this age. So around this time, apparently in the village they live in, because they live in a village, around the age of 13, they all start to get a job. And Yugo's job is that he has to go to this certain tree every single day and cut it down, because this tree is completely massive. Take like a redwood tree, that it's so absolutely massive that you can't even see this top. It's like a skyscraper in a way. But the difference between like a redwood and this thing is that this thing is so strong it would be like actually trying to cut down a real skyscraper with an axe. And the reason that the town wants to get this skyscraper of a tree cut down is simply because of the fact that it's so ginormous that it's sucking all the nutrients out of the soil, making it impossible for them to properly farm. So for around 3 or 4 generations by this point, his family, so Yugo's family, was assigned so that way they could chop down the tree. And Yugo's grandpa, or whoever it was, or the previous person that did it, what he did is he worked his entire life chopping down this tree, and all he was able to do throughout his entire life is able to cut down like maybe a foot or so into the tree, when this tree is maybe like, I don't know how big, maybe like 30, 40, 50 feet long. So massive tree, and throughout this entire guy's life, he was barely able to do anything to actually harm the tree, because the tree, not only is it super strong, but it also heals a little bit over time. So the next day when the guy comes back, it healed just a little bit. So over his entire life, he cuts out maybe a small fraction of what the tree actually is. And now it's going to be Yugo's job that for the rest of his life, he's going to have to take this axe made out of a very special kind of material. It's like a special, like almost like a steel type of axe, and it's incredibly strong, and it's able to cut down the tree. However, it does it very slowly. So they're sitting by this log type thing, and Alice brings Kirito and Yugo lunch. The one thing is, though, that, as I mentioned before, this is inside of some kind of virtual world. And they discuss how by the time that Alice gets there all the time, that whatever she brings them, the life on the food is almost gone. Because just like in Aincrad, because they didn't mention this in the actual show, they hinted at it in the Murder in a Safe Zone arc when Kirito dropped the sandwich and Sandwich-kun died.
So anyway, I think we should go over what we know so far.
Why? I figured the whole thing out hours ago.
You what?
Ah! My sandwich. It was innocent.
But any kind of food item in Sword Art Online has a very small amount of health. You drop it on the floor, it's gone. Like, the 5-second rule does not apply. And in this case, the virtual world that they're in, any kind of food item will degrade over time and spoil eventually, and as it spoils, if you try to eat it, then you'll get really sick, and then after it spoils, after a certain amount of time, it'll just disappear, and that's just how it is. So by the time that Alice brings them their lunch every single day as they're doing this, it's about to spoil, and they can't eat it by that point. So because of that, they always have to rush to eat their food, and they have to gulp it down in like 5 minutes, and they're just discussing this stuff and just acting like kids, and eventually, they start talking about a story that they heard from all the way up north, that there's a cave system that they're forbidden from going to, that if they go to this cave system, that they could get in serious trouble. And what ends up happening is that they go over a story that happened, like, let's say 5 generations ago, whenever it was, that there was this really, really crazy knight called the Integrity Knight is separate, but there was this really, really strong swordsman, and there was this dragon inside the cave. And this swordsman had, like, this crazy powerful sword, and he went up there to slay the dragon, and it's just a little story of what happened from the past. And they realize, something up north, there's ice. Maybe if we put ice in the thing, that will keep the food cool. So because of that, it'll be able to last longer. The reason they thought this is because in winter, the actual food tends to last longer, which makes sense because it's being preserved by the cold. But in this case, they thought, hey, maybe if we were to take the ice from up north, then we could actually make our food last longer, so we could actually sit down and enjoy our food rather than having to rush to eat it. The one thing is, though, that in this world, there's this thing called the taboo index. The basic idea of this is that there are certain laws in this world that you simply are not allowed to break. Because everything, it's almost like just a regular law book. It's the laws of the land. So you're not allowed to break anything in the taboo index. And one of the rules in the taboo index is that you cannot go to this area. I think it's called like the dark lands, or I don't remember what it's called, but it's like this area that is forbidden for normal people from going to, meaning that they were not allowed to go there. And the area that they're not allowed to go to is past the cave system, and right when you go into the cave and exit the other side, that's where this area is. So they thought of a loophole because of the fact that, something, as long as they don't exit the cave on the other side, they're technically not breaking the rules. And while the village leaders and while their parents might be upset at them, they technically didn't break any rules by doing this. So because of that, they end up choosing to go all the way up north, so that way they could find some snow for them to do this with. They end up going up north, and they enter this cave system, and it takes them like 3 hours in order to get there. It's like really, really far away, even though their village is the farthest up north from all the human villages in this world. Now, what ends up happening is that they get to the mouth of the cave, and they see that there's a little bit of icicles everywhere, but it's not enough for them to really grab, so that way they could bring back. So what they do is that they go further into the cave, and it starts getting really dark to the point that they really can't see much. And as they go further into the cave, they start leaving some kind of indications of how they could get out, so that way they don't lose their way. But eventually they get lost because there's this huge open room that's kind of like a maze, and they end up trying to see if they can find ice and snow in it. Now, as they go further into this cave system, they end up finding a whole pile of bones, human bones, along with dragon bones, and they see this massive blue sword, which ultimately confirms the fact that this whole story that they were talking about earlier about this legendary guy, that it actually was confirmed, that it really did happen, because this was an urban legend to them. They didn't think it actually happened, but it turns out it really did happen. So they try lifting the sword, and so Alice tries lifting the sword, if I remember right. I'm not sure if it was Alice or Yugo or Kirito, but one of them tries lifting the sword, and the sword is so heavy that they can't even lift it, and all 3 of them together try lifting the sword, and they simply can't lift the sword with the 3 of them together. It's that heavy, this sword. And after they get their ice and snow, they are starting to get really, really scared because they're seeing all these bones, and keep in mind, they're like 13. So because of that, they're getting ready to exit the cave, and there's not a lot of light in this area. But they see a river inside the cave, and they know that next to their village there happens to be a river. So they choose to follow the stream of the river, thinking that will lead them to where their village is, which is really smart on their part, because they also lost whatever indicator they put down to make sure they get back properly. Now, what ends up happening, though, is that after they start following the river, they actually end up on the other side of the cave system, on the wrong side. And as they get there, they look out, and it's entirely blackness. The soil is pure black. The sky is like pure black and red, and that's just how it is. And they know, hey, you know something? We're on the wrong side of the cave system. We went the wrong way. But they still know that as long as they don't step foot onto the black soil that they didn't do anything wrong. And all of a sudden, they see two things fighting overhead. They see a dragon with some guy riding on it, flying and trying to defeat this other guy who clearly is like the bad guy in this case. Now, it is rumored, or not rumored, but people believe in this world that at some point within this world's existence, that there will be a demon army that's going to invade the human world. So because of that, the government of the world set up a system of really, really powerful swordsmen that once this happens, that they will be there to protect the civilians, and that the entire point of this system is so that way once this crazy massive world-ending event happens, that the people there don't die, that they're able to minimize the bloodshed so that way as many civilians are able to live as possible. And what's happening is, so those people that are supposed to defend the civilians, they're known as integrity knights. And they're kind of like the law in this case. They're kind of like, in a way, like RoboCop, in that they are, what they say goes. They're like the Spectres from the Mass Effect series, in that their word is absolute law. The only thing that's different between them and Spectres is that they also have to obey the Forbidden Index, versus in Mass Effect, which they could do realistically whatever they want, but you guys get the point. Now, as this is happening, the Integrity Knight is fighting this guy, and all of a sudden something happens, and the Integrity Knight starts to lose. And Alice gets really scared by this, and she wants to help him because she has like some level of magic affinity, and she wants to help the guy, but out of sheer instinct, she accidentally trips over because like she was moving forward so that way she could get a better look, see what's going on, see if maybe she could help, but she ends up tripping, and because of that, she falls over, and her hand touches some of the soil of this black area. And as soon as this happens, she gets up, and a giant purple hexagon pops up in the middle of the ceiling and says a bunch of computer mumbo jumbo and stuff like that. And these three kids are scared out of their minds by this point, because they knew that, you know something, we can go here and maybe everyone will be upset at us, but as long as we don't actually go outside the cave system, then we didn't technically do anything wrong, so it's not really a big deal. But now they realize, you know something, we did it, and there's actual consequences to our actions. And because they're kids, it's believable that they'd be able to do something like that and not realize that their actions have consequences. So they end up running back to the village as quick as they can, completely leaving the snow there. Like, they just run as fast as they can, just trying to forget about the whole incident. And as they get back, they choose as best as they can to completely forget about everything that happened until the next day. The next day, what ends up happening is that a guy on a dragon, so one of the Integrity Knights, comes by the village, which this is massive because this is a little who cares village, and one of the biggest knights in the land, which this is just a little factoid that they reveal later in the book, so it's not really spoilers because it's just like a little tiny thing that doesn't have to do with the plot. There's like only like 23 Integrity Knights total or something like that. So one of these massive important warriors is coming to this village, and he's saying that he knew that Alice violated the taboo index, and because of that, he's here to take her away. And the way they know that, we know, us as the reader, or in your case probably the viewer, you're supposed to understand that the reason he knows that is because they're in some kind of virtual world. It's both hinted at because of the fact that all of the purple index boxes everywhere, and a lot of the magic systems and stuff like that, as well as a lot of the carryover from Sword Art Online as a whole, and knowing what the series is. So us as the reader slash viewer knows that the reason he knows this is because he's in a virtual world, but them as the characters, and even for some reason Kirito, does not understand how this guy is able to do that. Now what ends up happening is that Alice is forced to come with this guy, and he essentially just takes her away and brings her to the capital. Now, as this is happening, Yugo has the axe on him that he uses to cut down the tree. and he is really considering running up to this Integrity Knight and just attacking him with the axe, but for some reason he is physically not capable of doing so, to the point that when he tries to move his legs, he is not able to, and Kirito keeps telling him we have to do something about it, but ultimately they simply weren't able to do anything about it. And with that's the first 3 or so chapters of Sword Art Online Alicization. So that's not the end of Volume 1, that's just the first 3 chapters or so. The reason I'm stopping with this take here is because then it transitions to something else, and I just want to refresh my memory on what happened just so I can explain it properly. The story then transitions to the Dicey Cafe. If you don't know what that is, that's Egg-Yell's bar in the real world. And what ends up happening is that Kirito's sitting there with Egg-Yell, Sinon, and maybe a few others. I don't remember if anyone else was there. And essentially, he's talking about a new job he just got, because he just got a new job through Kikuoka. If you don't remember Kikuoka, he was the guy that gave Kirito the job to investigate the Death Gun incident. And Kikuoka was able to get him a job that pays very, very well, like ridiculously well, and it's a very weird job. All he has to do is sleep. Because at its core, and he's explaining what the job is, that he's sleeping in some kind of VR device, and he doesn't know why or what goes on or anything like that, but that's all he has to do, and he gets paid a massive amount of money per hour as he sleeps while doing this job. Now, all he knows about it is that this machine is part of Project Wrath, which, if you did not see the end of Sword Art Online Ordinal Scale, then they actually hint towards Project Wrath, which is major in Alicization.
Why all the mystery, Kikuoka? What did you bring me down here for? I appreciate you getting the charges against me dropped, but it's time you told me what this is about.
Actually, Doctor, I want to talk about the future. I've been keeping a close eye on your research, and now I feel like I've seen how far a top-down AI can go. But I have my sights on a different kind of future. You're the head of the Shigemura Research Lab. Your students included Akihiko Kayaba and Nobuyuki Sugo. So, I know what I'm about to show you will interest you.
Kikuoka, what is that?
Welcome to Wrath.
And it's a massive part of the entire plotline as a whole. So he is involved with Project Wrath, that he is one of the test subjects, and he ends up discussing what he knows about the project. What he knows is that the project is meant to detect flux lights, which I'll get into what those are in a second, and that it's meant to figure out how they work and various aspects around them. Now, what flux lights is that it's Sword Art Online's way of describing the human soul. So, if you guys remember in the second story arc, so in in ALO, in that arc, right at the end, the Sugo was going on and on about how this power that he now has gives him the ability to manipulate the very human soul.
I have 300 former players of SAO under my thumb, and now thanks to their dedicated cooperation, the technology I developed for total control of emotions and thought is 80% complete. I'm about to achieve what no one else has, the total control of the human soul, the power of a god. It's so close I can almost taste it.
To be honest, and this isn't foreshadowing in any way, to any specific events at least, it's just foreshadowing to the overall direction of the storyline, that he wasn't entirely wrong, and you'll see why as the storyline continues. Now, that's not foreshadowing to anything that he does or anything like that. It's just foreshadowing to the overall plotline, which is why I don't really consider that spoiler, since I'm not spoiling anything specific. Now, what ends up happening is that he explains how flux lights are this thing in the brain that everyone has that essentially end up being the equivalent of the human soul. It's very, very detailed what they explain about it, and I don't want to get into it because while I could cite specific sources on the page because I have stuff bookmarked, I don't think it's entirely necessary, so just take it as the fact that it is the human soul, and that they realize that the human soul only has a certain amount of information that it can hold. Does this make sense? In context, yes and no. Out of context, it doesn't really sound sound like it makes sense, but with any show like this, you do have to have some level of suspension of disbelief, which is at least how I justify it. So the human soul can only have a certain amount of information stored, and what this does is that this machine puts him in some kind of virtual environment, and he has no memory of what goes on in the virtual environment once he wakes up, and it could be different every time. So every time he goes into this virtual environment, it could be completely different, and that's all he knows. That, and also he knows the fact that this machine that he is being put in, that it has the ability to accelerate the perception of time by accelerating the rate at which the human soul is receiving information, meaning that while he's in this machine, as long as he's there, they could choose to accelerate time for him, so that way one day would be the equivalent of, let's say, 1 year in the real world. So just for perspective. Now again, because of the capacity on how much information the human soul can hold, that means that they can't just put Kirito in, let's say, the like Civilization 5 style that they have him in the barbarian ages, and then have him go to future age all in the period of a weekend, because that would be way too much information for his soul to hold, meaning that there has to be a cap as to how fast they do put the accelerated clock speed and everything. And the entire beginning of that one scene is just to explain various bits and details like that. They talk about GGO as a bit, just to explain some aspects of GGO and to catch up with Sino and different stuff like that. And it's a lot of catch up and a little bit of just them hanging out, which, to be honest, I really, really enjoyed. It was really interesting, even though it wasn't very plot heavy. Where it gets plot heavy is in the next part, because Kirito and Asuna go on a date, and they're on a date in the middle of the street, just hanging out, talking, and doing their random thing. And Kirito reveals that in order for him to research the future of full dive technology, that he is planning on traveling to America, specifically to some college. I don't remember what the college is, so that way he could help them research this thing that they figured out about implanting something into the human brain, which he thinks is where the future of the technology is going, unlike the thing that he's currently doing, which is being able to like this job that he's doing, just putting him in that wrath machine, and it's accelerating his soul. So he thinks that this is the direction that it's going in, and he reveals to Asuna that that is what he wants to do. At the same time, however, Asuna tells him that she'll pretty much follow him to the end of the earth and follow him wherever he wants, because she loves him, and that's just how it is. Now, right as this is happening, however, keep in mind it's in public, in the middle of the street, something massive happens, and this is what I mentioned of the return of Death Gun. That Johnny Black, the other half of Death Gun, shows up out of nowhere, essentially, and stabs Kirito. So I'm explaining it really quickly because of the fact that I'm not going to go over all the details of everything that happened, simply because it's not necessary to the overall plot. Rather, it's important to the scene, but not the overall plot. But all you need to know is that Johnny Black, who again is the other half of Death Gun, there was Red-Eyed Zaza, who was the Death Gun we knew from GGO. He was Sinon's friend, and that was the Death Gun we knew. But the partner was Johnny Black. So that's just how it is. Johnny Black is the guy who, if you really know Sword Art Online trivia, he used like a poison knife or something like that, and was he arrested or not? I think he was arrested in the SAO arc. Like, not arrested as in put in jail in the real world. He was put into a jail in Aincrad until the game was ended. So that's just one thing you probably, I think, kind of interesting. Might as well let you guys know. So Johnny Black shows up out of nowhere, essentially, and stabs Kirito with, what's this thing? Succinylchlorine, chlorine, which it's a real drug, by the way, and this is the drug that they used in the GGO arc in order to kill the other people using the heart attack. So I was doing some research on this for a Sword Art Online fact video, and everything they say about it in the Sword Art Online show and in the novel about what its capabilities are actually 100% correct. So it was actually pretty interesting. So this drug is real, and it is able to kill in the exact way mentioned in the light novel. So just a little bit interesting tidbit. But Asuna knew that that's probably what Johnny Black stabbed him with, and if Kirito fell over in her arms and she's yelling out for help, eventually an ambulance comes and picks Kirito up, and Asuna's in the thing with him, and she immediately tells the doctor that he was stabbed and injected with this special chemical, and the doctor's going nuts, like, how was he stabbed with this? Quick, we need to do X and Y and Z so that way we make sure he doesn't die, and he flatlines and dies. Yes, Jesus-kun dies. Or so we think. After this, Kirito wakes up in the middle of a forest just out of nowhere, and he is his current age of, I think it's like 18, 19, whatever it is. He's just his current age, and he's in the middle of a forest, but he doesn't know what's going on. At first, he's not aware if this is the real world or the virtual world, and he doesn't remember what happened last at first. He doesn't remember the fact that he was just dead and stabbed by Johnny Black. So he's not aware of what's going on, but all he does know is that he has to figure out whether, one, if he's in a virtual world or the real world, two, what's really going on, and three, how he could get back to wherever he was and get back home. So he does a couple tests so that way he could see if he's in a virtual world or not. The first thing he was thinking is that he could go to a really high place and jump off and essentially kill himself, and if it's a virtual world, then what would happen is he would respawn or something along those lines, or at the very least he would be able to contact a GM so that way they could explain to him either A, what's going on, or B, just let him out of this game. But the one thing is, because he's not 100% sure that it is a virtual world, then if it's not a virtual world, he would just kill himself. So, and even if it is a virtual world, he's not 100% sure whether or not, even by killing himself, that he'd be able to respawn. So because of that, he decides, okay, let me see if there's other tests that I can do, and he does a few things so that way he can see. But by the end of it, he's not 100% sure whether or not he's in a virtual world or not. So he's walking through the forest, and he gets a glimpse of this boy around his age that is cutting down a tree. So keep in mind, again, Kirito is now around 18, 19, however old he is, and he sees this boy that's around his age, and this boy introduces himself as Yugo, but he's never seen Kirito before, and this is a really small village, so it's very strange to find random people out of nowhere. Yugo automatically thinks, for some reason, that Kirito happens to be one of the lost children of something. I don't remember what the term is, but that there was this incident like 10 years ago that some witch came by or something like that and kidnapped a whole bunch of children, and that somehow he was one of them, and that he probably found his way back. But it seems that, and Kirito's faking amnesia so that way, because he's not aware of what's really going on, just so that way everyone can explain to him what's going on. So he goes along with it and says, yeah, maybe I am, but I have amnesia, so I'm not 100% sure. And they end up becoming friends, and they end up just hanging out for a little while. So Kirito ends up asking Yugo, hey, what are you doing? Why are you cutting down this tree? Blah, blah, blah. And Yugo explains, oh, you know something? It's been my job since I was around 13 or so that I have to cut down this tree. And he explains how he's going to go his entire life trying to cut down this tree, and that he's probably not going to really get much closer, and that his kids and grandkids and great-great-great-great-great-great-grandkids are all going to do the exact same thing, and that they're going to essentially not be any closer to it than he was, simply because of how absolutely massive this tree is. But he was getting tired, because it's kind of tiring to hold a 50-pound axe and swing it at a tree all day, and Kirito offered to actually do it alongside him. So Yugo taught him how he's supposed to handle the axe and how he's supposed to swing it properly, and Kirito doesn't do very well at first. And eventually Kirito gets the hang of it, and they start doing it together, and they start hanging out, and it just makes both their jobs easier, because they have to get in like around 2,000 swings a day, so if they both do 1,000, it makes the job a whole lot faster and easier. Now, earlier in the thing, I didn't go over this at the time because I know the best way to fit it in, but earlier in the light novel, and one of the ways that we as a viewer are clued into the fact that this is a virtual world, there's this idea that every single object in this virtual world has some kind of status meter that any living thing can access at any given time. All you have to do is pull up a menu on that item, meaning that you could pull up a menu on any kind, like if you pull up a menu on the tree, it will actually say exactly how much life it has, life being the equivalent of HP. and this tree has like 10,000 years left on it. So if it were left alone for 10,000 years, then finally it would die after all that. But by attacking it with the axe and by cutting it down with the axe, it slowly brings that time down, and that's how they know that they're getting through to it. And it's the same thing with everything else. That's also how they knew when their food was going to expire. It explains a lot of things. Now, it's kind of taboo to actually do it on another human, but you're allowed to do it. It's not against the taboo index to do it. And Kirito curiously asked Yugo what he was doing and various things like that, and they end up looking at each other's health meters, things like that. And one thing that Kirito discovers, first off, he discovers that yes, he's in a virtual world by the very fact that there is this little health meter thing that he's able to open whenever he wants. But at the same time, he comes to the realization that he's not in a game like Alfheim Online, like Asuna was trapped in. That this is something completely separate and that he doesn't know where he is. And what we end up seeing is that, what he ends up seeing is that there's this little thing in the menu there called like the user's level or something like that. And it doesn't outright say level, it's object priority status or something. It's the object's just how much priority it has. And it shows that Kirito's is like 20 while Yugo's is like 30 something. Now, we end up finding out later what this is, and it's actually really important, but at the time, they don't really know what this is. Yugo, being part of this virtual world, has absolutely no idea what it is. Kirito now knows he's in a virtual world, but Yugo's mannerisms and the way he's acting are so lifelike that he doesn't know whether or not Yugo is an actual human being or whether or not he's an AI, simply because of the fact that Yugo can't be a traditional AI in the sense that Yui is. They don't really clue this in the show too much, but in the light novel they emphasize it a bit more. But Yui's not a perfect AI. Yui is something called a top-down AI. There's top-down AIs and then there's bottom-up AIs. A top-down AI is an AI that you feed it a bunch of information and it learns from that. A bottom-up AI is a true artificial intelligence that's capable of making actual choices. The difference is with top-down AI, you give it one input, it will give you the same output every single time. With a bottom-up AI, it's capable of actually thinking about what it's going to answer and changing its answer depending on more like, not necessarily its mood, but it's able to take into account other factors and it's able to decide different things, kind of like an actual human. That maybe one day I'm in a mood for pizza and the other day I'm in a mood for noodles. That's kind of how it is. That's the difference between a top-down, bottom-up AI. Now, because of this, with Yui, sometimes she simply wouldn't know things, which is natural because she's not a true artificial intelligence. And when she's not understanding some of the questions that Kirito and Asuna might ask her, or some stuff like that, then Yui will often say, "Oh, I don't understand what the question is, can you please clarify?" Stuff like that. Because she's a very, very good AI, usually the next time around she'll get it, but she's not a perfect AI. This AI, though, or this human, or whatever it is, whatever Yugo is, whether he be human or AI or whatever he is, because Kirito doesn't know and the viewer doesn't know, and to be honest, I don't know. Well, okay, I do know, but I'm not going to say whether or not he is an AI or not because his mannerisms are way too human-like for him to be an AI. So it's simply not possible for him to be an AI. But at the same time, Kirito doesn't understand how it would be possible for them to get so many people Yugo is implying that there's a village, that they'd be able to populate an entire village with actual humans, and how massive is this project? Because by this point he's starting to realize that this is part of Project Wrath. Now, another thing is that Kirito is supposed to enter the actual virtual world with no memory of the real world for various reasons. Yet, for some reason, he's going into this with full knowledge of the real world. So how is it that he has his full memory in this virtual world when he's supposed to have it blocked off as long as he's in the virtual world? So he's incredibly confused as to what in the world is happening here. And because of that, he doesn't know how to react. So he chooses to follow along with Yugo to go to his village, and there they end up he explains to the townsfolk that Kirito is one of those lost children type people, and he ends up taking residence in the cathedral of the town. So the cathedral is where Alice used to live. She was she was the daughter of a priest, and she had a younger sister. And Kirito ends up staying there simply because of the fact that he has nowhere else really to stay, and Yugo obviously has his own home. Now there, Kirito meets Alice's younger sister, and keep in mind he doesn't remember Alice or Yugo, and at the same time, Yugo does not remember Kirito at all for some reason, even though we saw in the beginning of the thing that they clearly did know each other from when they were kids. Whether or not that is real or fake, we know now it's a virtual world, but what in the world is going on, and how can't they remember each other, yet Kirito has his memories of the real world now? So, in the end, they end up coming to the realization somehow, and Kirito ends up hanging out with this girl who is Alice's younger sister, and Alice was like a prodigy at magic. She was just really, really good at it. And this younger girl, this younger sister of Alice, she happens to be decent at magic, but she's not to the level that Alice was. But because Alice was taken away, she is now the priestess instead of Alice. Now, the problem with this is the fact that Kirito, this girl is explaining how her older sister was taken away by the Integrity Knights, and Yugo also explains the same story, but Kirito does not remember it because, to his knowledge, he never was there in the first place. And after a while, them just hanging out and them exploring the overall plot and story and everything like that, Kirito and Yugo come to the realization of what that object priority meter is and what it actually does. And they realize that the higher your object priority level is, the stronger and better items you could actually wield. So that blue sword at the beginning of the thing that was held by that dragon, by that guy that beat up the dragon, that was the reason that all three of them together couldn't pick it up was because they had such a high object priority level that they simply weren't even able to lift it off the ground. Now, you're able to lift up an object with a high priority level even if you are not a high enough level to, but you simply can't properly wield it, which makes sense considering this isn't a video game, it's a virtual world per se. So, because of that, it wouldn't make sense that they simply couldn't lift it up, rather that they're simply not capable of doing so. So, because of the fact that Yugo's dream, or not really his dream, his motivation is to rescue Alice in the end, that he decides ultimately to go out of his way and that he wants to be able to cut down this tree, because until he could cut down this tree, he's not able to go save Alice. Once he is able to cut down this tree, he's able to go pick whatever job he wants, and he could choose the job of being an adventurer essentially, or kind of like a warrior to a degree. And by doing that, he'd be able to go outside the town and go to the capital eventually, and maybe one day be able to save Alice by becoming an Integrity Knight. So because of that, he needs to be able to chop down this tree, but at the rate that things are going, it's simply not going to happen within his lifetime. So Kirito and Yugo end up having the idea to go to this cave system, both of Yugo realizing what happened in the past and him being hesitant on doing it, but Kirito not realizing what happened in the past and him not remembering obviously what happened with Alice and everything like that. But they end up deciding to go to this cave system so that way they could get the sword, thinking, you know something, maybe the sword, because it's a much higher priority level, that we could cut down the tree a lot faster using it. So they go to this cave system the same way they did as a kid. Because they're a lot bigger now, they are able to move a lot faster. So instead of taking 3 hours, it took them like an hour at most. And it's Kirito, Yugo, and Alice's younger sister, and they're all going to this cave system. Eventually, and I'm skipping over a lot of plot details simply because of the fact that I don't remember everything specifically, I'm just trying to cover the overall plot. Eventually, they make it to the cave system, and they find the sword, and they're about to pick it up, and the thing is so heavy that them two together had to pick it up, and they simply weren't able to properly really wield it. It was that massively heavy. So they end up eventually working together to try and lift it up, and they end up running into a group of goblins. And these goblins are some of those creatures from the other side that the Forbidden Index forbids you from going into. And these goblins obviously want to kill Kirito, Yugo, and Alice because of the fact that they're goblins. So they end up having this massive fight. And keep in mind that Kirito is fresh in this new world. He doesn't really have a weapon on him other than this massive sword that he could barely wield. He doesn't have any sword skills or anything like that. And he has to fight off a group of goblins in order to maybe potentially not die. So he's thinking that, you know something, maybe because of the fact that I know I'm not part of this virtual world, maybe I'll respond, it's not a big deal for me, but I don't know about these two other people. So he doesn't want to die. He's not even 100% sure that he could be revived. So he doesn't even know what's going on in the end. So he really needs to make sure he wins this fight. Now, skipping over the overall plot, they're completely outmatched, and eventually Kirito goes up against the goblin leader. And because of this, my computer the screen just turned off, sorry about that. So, Kirito ends up devising some kind of plan to defeat the goblin leader. But at the same time, the goblin leader was able to severely hurt, I'm not sure if it was Kirito or Yugo, but it was one of the two, like severely wound him, even though Kirito was able to kill the goblin leader. So because of that, Alice's sister had to use some kind of forbidden magic technique that not a lot of people know about in order to transfer the life from Kirito to Yugo. But because of the way it was done and because of how quickly Yugo was losing blood, he was going to die anyways, even if this ritual was successful. It was dangerous to begin with because it could also kill Kirito. But at the same time, she had the potential to maybe save Yugo, but at the rate things were going, it looked like that Yugo was going to die. Also, what was interesting is that it was revealed with the way the goblins were acting that they weren't just regular goblins. They had some form of actual intelligence, which was incredibly strange for Kirito because he didn't understand why these low-level mobs have human-level intelligence. And in the end, as Alice's sister is trying to save Yugo, or whatever happened, I don't remember the specifics of the fight, but as this is happening and he's about to die, all of a sudden, what looks like a ghostly figure of Alice as she was a kid shows up, and she helps them, and because of that, Yugo or whoever it was that was dying, I'm 90% sure it was Yugo, but I'm not 100% sure, but whoever it was that was dying ended up living. And then Alice says, you know something, come find me because, come save me. And how do things end off from there? So because of that, in the end, they end up going back home, and they're pretty much scarred, and they're really, really scared of what happens. I don't remember if it says it in this light novel or not, but they end up using the sword to cut down the tree in the matter of like a month or so. So, unlike the fact that with the bone axe that would take the rest of Yugo's life, and then the rest of the lives of all of his children, and then some, that this one sword was so powerful that after a while they were able to chop down the tree in the matter of a month. Now also, after they beat up these goblins, they looked again at each other's health levels, and they saw that the object priority level of both of them shot up like crazy. Like they were boosted like 10 points, to the point that before, while they needed both of them working together to lift the sword, now either one of them can lift it just with a small amount of difficulty. And as they use the sword, they notice that their object priority level ends up going up even more. So we know that there is essentially some kind of leveling system in the game, and we don't know why that's the case, and us as the viewer are very confused as to what's going on, but all is explained later on. So after they chop down the tree, Kirito takes one of the branches with him because someone in the village tells him that this branch, that the tree itself was so massively strong that if you take just a single branch from it, and if you ask someone to carve it into a sword, that will probably be on par with Yugo's blue ice sword. So because of that, now Kirito is able to get his own massive OP level sword, And because of that, he ends up becoming stronger because of it. But just because he's really strong now, because he was able to beat up a group of goblins out of a good amount of luck and strategy, doesn't mean that he's incredibly OP, as we'll find out in the later light novels. So it ends off with Kirito and Yugo going out onto the road in hopes of going to the capital and being able to save Alice. And that's essentially how Alicization starts off. So that is Volume 9 of Sword Art Online Alicization. I'm not going to end it here, though, because I want to give you an idea of where this is going, because this arc is it's an incredible arc overall. You have to think about, first off, why is Kirito here in the first place? Didn't he just die or something like that? How is he still alive? Second off, why did Johnny Black kill him? I mean, it's not nearly as explored as it should be, but what is going on in general in the real world that all of this happened? Why does Kirito retain his memories even in this virtual world and not remember what happened in the past? Who is Yugo, and is he human or is he an AI? And what is this Project Wrath really doing that it's involved with the very human soul? And all of this and more is revealed in Volume 10 alone. And then it goes even more insane as the books continue. So this arc is absolutely incredible from start to finish, and I highly recommend reading the arcs or maybe watching the anime if you don't want to actually read the light novels, even though I could guarantee the director is going to mess it up. So that was a basic overview of Sword Art Online Alicization Volume 9. So I hope you guys enjoyed that one. Make sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. And if there's enough demand for it, maybe I'll do a part 2 going over Volume 10, because Volume 10 is absolutely my favorite volume by a landslide. The sheer amount of mind-blowing reveals in this one volume was insane. Like, it's a Mother's Rosario level twist, like that with Mother's Rosario, it was revealed that, oh, you know something, Yuki's dying. But this, it's like, it's not that someone's dying necessarily, but what is revealed is completely massive, and this story is incredibly dark and twisted, so get ready for a really good story arc. Anyways, make sure to like, favorite, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.